to be live. Okay, members, I declare this meeting open to the public, and I welcome members to the 60th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee in this mandate. Can I also advise members that the committee will be recorded and broadcast as usual throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay between any public and private sessions, so please be patient with the system. Can I also welcome those joining us in the public gallery and advise that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. Assembly Wi-Fi password can be found on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to record or take photographs of today's proceedings. We have no apologies today. Joining us online, we have Diane Forsyth, the Vice Chair, and also John Burrows, MLA, David Honeyford, MLA, and Padraig Delargy, MLA. Okay, members, on agenda item 2 of the draft minutes, can refer members to a copy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January, the pages 6 to 13 of the meeting pack. And members are content that they're an accurate reflection of that meeting. I'll sign them. Are members agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, members, can I remind members to ensure that they have considered the full agenda for the meeting and that all relevant declarations of interest are made early in the meeting to ensure that they're recorded in open session. At this point, can I ask members if there's any relevant declaration to declare? Diane?
Yeah, APS to the Education Minister.
Okay, thank you. Any others?
Chair of Communities, just not.
Patrick?
Chair, member of the Economy Committee.
Okay.
Of Communities.
And same for me, Danielle, member of the Economy Committee.
Okay.
Chair, sorry, the Infrastructure Committee as well, just the utilities piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. Chairperson's business is agenda item 4, and just before we proceed throughout the agenda, I would like to make absolutely clear, members, about the seriousness of an issue that's facing this committee and indeed this Assembly. As we speak, departments throughout the Executive are overspending or committing money they do not have, which is reckless and dangerous by all accounts. It undermines budgetary control, weakens confidence in public finances, and ultimately puts essential public services at risk. Ministerial directions were never designed to be a workaround for unaffordable decisions or poor financial planning. As members of this Assembly, and indeed as members of this Public Accounts Committee, we are custodians of public money on behalf of the people that we are elected to serve. That responsibility requires us to challenge behaviour that normalises overspend and treats financial limits as optional rather than binding. The growing use of ministerial directions to authorise spending beyond available budgets raises profound concerns about governance, accountability and compliance with managing public money. It also places accounting officers and departments in a difficult position and shifts the consequences of today's decisions onto future budgets and future executives. I think members will agree that it is entirely unacceptable where we're put in this situation where exceptional mechanisms become routine practice. And this seems to be the direction of travel. I just want to be clear about the role of this committee. Our role, our power as a Public Accounts Committee for Northern Ireland is not procedural. It is reputational, institutional and cumulative. Used properly, it is vitally important that we send a very clear message to all departments that the use and misuse of MDs is unacceptable. We need to ensure that there's tighter controls around these mechanisms, and we need to hold those responsible for such decisions to account in the interests of public money. So with that said, members, we will move on to matters arising. Is there any matters arising? No? Okay. Correspondence. Okay, members, at pages 18 to 30 of the pack is correspondence from the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly regarding the release of the Big Youth Survey Report 2025. It's great to hear from young people on the issues that matter most to them, and we look forward to finding opportunities to engage with the new Youth Assembly. I know members will agree that during inquiries and works and evidence sessions carried out by this committee during our tenure, we have found their evidence to be invaluable, their experience and their views to be of significant value to the work of this committee as well. So members, are you content to note the correspondence?
Content.
Okay, agenda item 7, members, is ministerial directions. The Teachers' Pay Award 25-26 and the FIFA Women's World Cup 2035. Members, we have been advised by the Controller and Auditor General that the Ministerial Direction on the Teachers' Pay Award for 25-26 is not available for consideration this week, as further information is required from the Department of Education. Members, are you content that this matter be deferred until the CNAG has received the necessary information to enable an assessment of the Ministerial Direction?
Right.
Just before I proceed,
Sorry, Chair, can you just, there's one thing that just got slightly past me there on the correspondence from the Youth Assembly. I think it's very heartening to see one of their top priorities, racism. I think that's very encouraging that young people are concerned about that, and I just want to flag it.
absolutely, I entirely agree with that, Con. Dorinnia, in relation to the information that is not received, have we any information on what that is?
So I suppose just apologies. I had hoped to bring it to you this week. I received I received notification just on the 23rd of December actually from the accounting officer, but it was just a notification and none of the background documents were provided to me at that time. So we have been back and forth in correspondence seeking information to enable us to provide audit scrutiny to bring to you. And a piece of information was received just late on Monday evening, which has just caused me to ask some more questions. So it's nothing other than the audit process, really, Chair, and me trying to conclude the evidence before I bring it in front of you.
Okay. Thank you. Members content?
Content, Chair.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dorinnia. You're very welcome to today's meeting, as are you, Seamus. It's good to have you here. Can I refer members to the Ministerial Direction in respect of FIFA, the Women's World Cup 2035? It's page 3 of the tabled pack. Dorinnia, I'll ask you to brief the committee on this particular Ministerial Direction.
Thank you, Chair. So members, you'll see on the 13th of November, the Department for the Economy Accounting Officer advised me that the DFE Minister had issued a ministerial direction to proceed with Northern Ireland's participation in a joint UK-wide bid to host the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035. In his letter, the Accounting Officer has forecast the cost, an estimated cost of up to 153 million, of which 112 million would be funded by the Executive, and in addition further bid costs of in the region of £180,000. You will see that against that, the Department estimated that the economic benefit to Northern Ireland in hosting would be substantially less, at a maximum of 63 million. And it was on that basis that the Accounting Officer advised he sought a ministerial direction, as he could not confirm that the expenditure would represent value for money. In addition, he also stated at the time of the proposal that there is no budget cover in place for either the bid costs or, in fact, the hosting costs. So in terms of the steps taken then, they're outlined in my letter to you. The Accounting Officer wrote seeking the ministerial direction formally. The DFE Minister provided that direction, and then the next stage of the process is to seek approval of the Finance Minister. The Finance Minister then responded, noting that the matter had been discussed at length by the Executive at their meeting of the 16th of October, at which Ministers agreed in principle to participate in the bid. And the Finance Minister concluded by saying that no approval was needed from the Minister of Finance, because in fact executive approval was given, and managing public money does allow for executive approval. In terms of my audit scrutiny then, we sought evidence of the decision of that meeting of the 16th of October. However, the minutes of that executive meeting are not currently available. In the absence of those minutes, we were provided with a copy of the paper that went to the executive, and you can see in that paper, it's included in your packs, that the executive were asked to make a final decision in relation to the North's participation in the Women's World Cup. What I can see from the paper is that all of those costs were fully included in the submission, so the executive did know and were made aware by officials of the costs involved in arriving in that decision. I haven't been able to fully bring you all evidence available because the minutes of the executive have not been made available. However, given that this was first notified to me on the 13th of November, I thought I was at a point that I needed to bring it to you. So I suppose in conclusion, I can't fully confirm the process has been followed, but I'm providing you with all the available evidence to date, members.
Thank you, Dorinnia. So a number of questions, obviously, from this. So you've said that there's an expected return of 63 million, is that what you said?
Yes.
So what is the estimated or anticipated cost?
Up to a maximum of 153 million, of which 112 million would be funded by this executive. So 112 million is what the ministerial direction was seeking, and that would take place years from now. In fact, 2033. 34 year and the 2035-36 year. The immediate costs, however, are the bid costs, which are estimated to be in the region of £180,000. So there are two elements of this ministerial direction that were sought at this time, and no budget cover in place for either at this time.
Okay. So just in relation to the ministerial direction, remind the committee just about what the accounting officer said. So it basically said that the decision was made at the executive level. Is that what you said?
So the process is the accounting officer sought the ministerial direction. Ministerial direction was given by his minister. And then the process requires that direction to be, I guess, further approved by either the Minister for Finance or, in the case of cross-cutting, the executive. So the accounting officer wrote to the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Finance responded saying that it had already been agreed by the executive at the meeting of the 16th of October, where ministers agreed in principle to participate in the bid.
Okay. And your role is to test, to scrutinise whether the process was followed. And I'm just citing from a document that I have here from the 2nd of February 2022, where the TOA, Stuart Stevenson, had written to the accounting officer for the Department of Finance, outlining some procedural elements, but just one point that jumps out at me. Department Minister may decide in certain circumstances that the issue should be discussed by the executive. If this happens and a decision is reached at the executive to agree to the course of action proposed by the departmental minister, it will be recorded in the minutes, which can be treated as a formal approval. So how, if you haven't got the minutes, can we be certain that that process was followed?
And that is the question that I have asked and been seeking. So, and the accounting officer has assisted us as ably as he can. He has tried to provide us with those minutes. They simply haven't been released by the executive.
What would be the reason for that? 4 months have passed? More than 4 months?
I don't know.
Okay. Could it be the case, and you may not be able to comment on this, but could it be the case that actually maybe that decision wasn't reached? We have no evidence of it. How do we assume that this was agreed? How do we ensure the process was followed?
So that is the last bit of evidence available. I don't have that, and in the absence of that, I've brought you as much evidence as I can. So I can see that the information was brought to the executive. I can see that the executive were asked to make a decision on it, and the accounting officer has been advised that a decision was made, and again the finance minister has responded to confirm that ministers took a decision at that meeting to agree in principle to participate in the bid.
In the interests of governance and accountability, those minutes were requested by you to ensure due process was followed, and they haven't been forthcoming.
No.
When were they first requested?
Before Christmas.
Before Christmas, yeah.
Okay, near the end of January. I don't think that's very acceptable. You know, it only leaves us in a situation almost to assume, particularly from the TOA's guidance, that in the absence of such minutes, you know, we have no proof that an actual formal approval was given. So we need proof that a process was followed in relation to this decision, which is going to cost a significant amount of public money, way beyond anything that's going to return, regardless of the issue at hand or the event at hand. You know, this is important in terms of process. We're responsible for scrutinising process, and we're in a situation where the minutes aren't forthcoming. So that is unacceptable, and I have no doubt we'll be touching on that with the TOA later. Has Diane, Column's looking in, then Diane. Okay.
Yeah, I suppose just quite well. I suppose first of all to say, like, these big events are certainly something that we're keen to see. Sporting brings huge benefit to it, and I suppose I'm very aware of that in my role as chair of the Communities Committee, and particularly women's sport. But certainly, and I'm taking what the Auditor General is saying around not being entirely clear yet, and we will be obviously coming back to this. But in relation to the 153 million versus the 112 that the executive would cost, who meets the 41 million shortfall there?
Yeah, we're advised that it's a combination of the UK Government and Belfast City Council. There was initially an intention that the IFA would also contribute 17 million approximately towards the cost, but they've confirmed that they don't have the funding, so that element will also pass to the executive to cover.
Okay, and I suppose the other thing to note is that most of these big events would seem to generate more income. I know we were disappointed to not get the Euros across, for example. So I suppose that's part of the context just within which we'll have to consider this all as we go forward.
Yeah, I the reason I've went into this in great detail just before I allow Diane to go in, there seems to be a trend coming through here where departments are simply signing off on spend where they don't have the resources or money to cover, and that is where our role comes into effect. It's not about what the actual issue is, but it's about the mismanagement or the overspend of monies that aren't, and resources that aren't available, and equally the consequences of such decisions next year, for instance. So it is a point of concern, and one we're very clearly going to delve into shortly. Diane?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Dorinnia and Seamus, for coming to committee again. I think with this one, I'm a huge supporter of women's football, and it's brilliant to see Northern Ireland being part of the UK-wide bid, and I think it's very, very exciting to see this coming through, that Northern Ireland with the opportunity to be a part of this in 2035, and I would concur with Column's comments around that. But in terms of this and the ministerial direction, I think as a matter of the process, it's right that the accounting officer has asked or brought it forward for a ministerial direction, because from where he's sitting, it's very clearly unaffordable. So in terms of his position as accounting officer, he couldn't sign off on it, so it required obviously the minister's intervention there. But in terms of the numbers, Dorinnia, I just wanted to ask, in your report there where you're reporting on what's come through from the Department of the Economy, it's those costs there, we're talking about the 112 million versus what the Department for the Economy estimated to be economic benefit of 63 million. I just wanted to ask, in terms of that 63 million, did you audit how they arrived at that figure? Because I'm sure a lot of people will have seen today, there was quite a lot of commentary. There was James Hamilton from Turner and Turner was speaking at a CBRE event, and he was speaking about how about 120 million of economic benefit and boost to Northern Ireland would come on the back of Northern Ireland Women's World Cup bid. So I just was wondering in terms of that 63 million, because if it was more in line with what was reported by this other expert today. it would just set a very different circumstance there.
No, to answer your question, no, we haven't audited the figures because we're at this stage we're auditing the process, and on the basis of those figures presented, you can see a clear shortfall. They're both estimates, and in all the paperwork that we have seen, we also know that the decision around this had to be taken at haste. And that was pointed out by the accounting officer in some of his submissions as well. So they were estimates at a point in time, and because we're looking at the process, we can see from those two estimated figures, we can, I guess, see why the accounting officer was struggling to make a value for money judgment at that time. But as with all estimates, I would expect them to move. We will, of course, first audit the bid cost, as it will fall into next year's year of account for me. The actual costs of the event will be some years down the line before I audit those.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the procedure on this, the accounting officers acted appropriately. He was landed with this at haste. He got the estimate of the cost, the estimate of what the economic benefit was, put them together, and he couldn't recommend that they could move forward, so asked for the ministerial direction, and it has been brought through as approved by the executive. So I don't really have any further questions on that, but I would be keen to see, maybe it's something I suppose maybe the economy committee would pick up on, how they arrived at that estimate of what the economic benefit actually is, whenever almost double is projected as reported today. But thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dan. David?
Thank you, Chair. Just follow on from Dan and actually Colin, I totally agree. These big events are a real boost actually to the wider economy and the sports fans everywhere. So I also think it's important in female games that we give that female sport the profile and allow women's football to really grow. So I really think that is important. I'm a huge supporter of that. Have been across multiple events. I suppose the bit for me is whenever you read this, just to clarify, you said it's 112 million, but whenever that 112 million, you said about 15 million that the IFA, or 17 million was it, from the IFA that they're not doing, is that 112, sorry, plus the IFA contribution, or is that included in it? And then that whenever you look at this, it's actually 6 games, so it's about 18 million a game. It's just the breakdown of where that 112 comes from, because we haven't seen the detail of that, but in principle want to see us take part in this, be part of this and go. But it's just those figures around, if we could, and actually follow on from Diane. I also think that's 63 million, it's 33 I think it was for ongoing, of where the breakdown of that and where that comes from, because I think that could be potentially underestimated. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't audited the figures, but based on the information we've been presented with, I believe the 17 million is included within the 112 million pounds cost. Obviously, in future we will come back and have a look at the actual figures and audit those as part of our annual audit of the accounts at the appropriate time.
Okay, and just to be clear, I think we're all on the one page in terms of the iconic event that this is and the importance of it for a vast variety of reasons. Particularly the platform that it presents for our community and society, and absolutely women in sport, etc., etc. But beyond that, before that, our role as a committee is to scrutinise whether due process was followed, and at the minute there is a big question mark over whether that is the case. So my proposal, this isn't about FIFA, it's about whatever the issue is on this. If my question is why these minutes have not been forthcoming, it should be straightforward, and 4 months have passed. So I'd be proposing that we write to the Department of Finance to seek clarification as to why the minutes were not released at the request of the CNAG, so that she could ensure that the due processes were followed. Would that be okay, Dorinnia?
We understand that the minutes come via TEO.
EO, sorry, yeah.
TEO.
Yes, sorry. First and Deputy First Minister is the head of the executive, of course.
And the request was from the accounting officer, not from us directly.
Yes, yeah, I suppose, that's the point. It's the accounting officer that has been requesting them in order to provide them to us. I haven't been requesting them directly.
So The accounting officer, I'm a bit blurred on what here. So the accounting officer saying what?
The accounting officer has an obligation to provide me with all the evidence. You know, I suppose the executive does not have to provide me with their minutes as such. So in just following due process, I've asked the accounting officer if I could see then the minutes approving the decision. They're not available from the executive yet, and we have. The accounting officer has asked a couple of times for us. We asked could we see draft minutes, because last week we were afforded redacted draft minutes in relation to the Department of Health ministerial direction, but we haven't. They are not available either, and we have seen correspondence back from the accounting officer and TAO confirming that directly. So
how do we ensure processes are being followed? Yeah, I'll refer to Stuart now. Okay, Cal.
Just because I want to follow the process here, because the accounting officer called it in, which is fine. Saying, like, I'm just trying to even remember myself and all this. Has this ever happened before? You know what I mean, in terms of where it has been an executive. Well, apparently it's an executive issue, which is fair enough, and there's merit in everything everybody said about the event. So I just want, has this ever? Just like last week, with a situation where it's never come before this committee before. But clearly the procedure has been followed properly. We're just waiting on more information, and obviously felt, because of the length of time you brought it before committee.
Yeah.
To be fair, I could have said to you, let's wait and see, you know, give it another month or 2 weeks or whatever, to see if we get a response through the accounting officer but I'm just, have we ever experienced this before? It hasn't in my time, Dorinnia, this type of
no, I don't
procedural
believe
challenge
so.
or for us as a committee ever?
Yeah, I don't believe so, and that's why we sought to try and bring you as much as we could, so we can, you know, certainly we can see evidence that the papers have gone to the executive on that date. We have seen the executive being asked for approval. You know, we've no reason to doubt that this won't go through, I guess, and certainly the finance minister in his correspondence, having been at that meeting, is saying that the decision was taken. It's the auditor in me asks for that underlying bit of evidence.
And likewise, I'm just going to go on out from a committee point of view, from experience, because it seems it's followed proper procedure. But all I'm saying is, it normally goes from the accounting officer to the minister to DOF generally. Now this issue is going to executive, because overall, right?
Yeah, and that is right.
For the reasons being, and now we're in a situation, and I understand the process. It's just obviously maybe it's for somebody else to ask the question to somebody else, but it's quite interesting. And like we said, we had this conversation last week. Even me and the chair had a good ding dong or robust conversation over this, because these are things that are being presented to us now that are, you know, not your regular challenge, but they're new on the table for us. And that's what we're teasing out today, to be fair to the chair. And maybe it's a question for somebody else, but like I say, the accounting officer may get this information next week or be presented.
We have to be very conscious at all times, members, about the role of this committee. And the role of this committee is to abide by what this committee is designed to do. We're here to ensure that the processes are followed. And at the minute, it's not for the CNAG or for the Northern Ireland Audit Office to assume that the process was followed. They need proof that the process was followed. And there's hard lessons learned here over recent years, particularly when you look at RHI and the huge criticism that came about of that, because minutes weren't taken, all sorts of issues. And, you know, this is about good governance. I think the CNAG has raised a legitimate concern. I don't think it's appropriate that it has taken 4 months for the accounting officer to get his hands on the minutes, for them to be furnished as evidence for the process being followed. Just before I allow Padraig in, Stuart, what's your reading of this?
I absolutely agree, Chair. And you've mentioned RHI. That's exactly what I was thinking about, the importance of proper administrative processes being followed and having approvals, the necessary approvals in place at each step. It is important, and the CNAG talks about, you know, trust but validate, and it's that validation element is a critical element of this process. Absolutely agree with you, Chair.
And in terms of your important role and function as the Treasury Officer of Accounts, what role have you got to ensure that the process was followed? You know, like for instance, if the minutes aren't being provided, are you raising that concern?
It's a difficult one, Chair. We deal with the guidance
Yes.
and setting the rules, if you like.
So this is a test to see if the rules are followed, and I'm trying to establish that.
Absolutely. As soon as we're aware of issues, we will find a way to flag that as a concern. Every so often I would write to the accounting officers with a range of issues that have emerged through various inquiries, the work of this committee, and any concerns we have that procedures aren't being followed. So in the past, that's probably been our best way of flagging that concern. But I think for us really, and again, pointing and looking back to RHI, it was the lack of approval being in place for that expenditure that highlighted it, as picked up and reported by the CNAG and the Audit Office. You know, and I think the audit activity is very much there to check not just that the accounts are true and fair view, but also in many respects that the procedures were in place in terms of approvals and so on. So we look very much to external audit from NIAO and also the work of internal audit as well within the departments. That's an important element, and which is obviously feeding into the departmental audit risk committees. But there's work there as well to test the suitability of processes and administrative functions in departments.
Okay. In terms of an action, then, we write to TEO.
We question want to come in with first. So just wondering on the 180,000, which we haven't focused so much on, is it the case, or do you know, was that 180,000 required to kind of keep the bid alive in a sense? Was that a critical factor in any of this?
Yes, so the 180,000 are the bid costs, and they will fall into the next year's year of account. So I will be looking at those as part of my financial audit work next year. So they're the immediate short-term costs for the bid, and then the bigger cost is the actual hosting costs when in around the 2035 year.
So, members, if due process is followed, that's fine, but I am not comfortable until I know that the CNAG is at sight of the minutes. So I would request, members, that we write as a committee to seek clarification or an explanation as to why those minutes have not been provided, and we can choose the form of words for that letter. Would that be appropriate, members? Are you content? Okay. Padraig, you looking in?
Yeah, no, I suppose, look, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, and I think definitely following on from the points that others have made, this is a good news story. You know, this is about delivery. It's about delivery in sport. It's about delivery specifically in women's sport. So I think just in terms of the overall narrative, we need to make sure that we don't turn a positive and a negative, because one of the things about this for me is, like, all executive ministers, from my understanding, were aware of this. You know, there was no disagreement on it. And while I absolutely agree that there could be enhanced scrutiny and additional scrutiny in terms of why those minutes haven't been sent on, look, there's no doubt as to the fact that that is an issue which we want to resolve. But it's important to stress on this that there's actually no evidence to the contrary. There's no evidence the process hasn't been followed. So I just think that, you know, absolutely appreciating that we want the clarity, we want to get that full picture, to be able to be absolutely assured of that, and that is our role as a committee. But I want to ensure that we don't sort of steer towards suggesting that the process hasn't been followed, because that doesn't appear to have been the case. So I just think I do agree with the suggestion. I do think we can you know, look at that, and I'm happy to agree that as a committee, but I just want to ensure that we don't turn a really positive story, particularly when you look at the lack of progress that had been made until this week on casement. We want to make sure that we don't turn a negative story, or sorry, a positive story and the negative story. And I think this is something that we should all be celebrating. And of course, we want to make sure process is followed. That there's no suggestion that it hasn't. But let's get that clarity to ensure that the process has been followed and that we can make sure that all our processes are followed and checked.
Thanks, Patrick. Members, I don't think, we have to be very clear about something. Yes, it's a positive story. There's no question over that. We're all in support of it. We want to see it happen. We want to see more of that happening. And we know what the benefits of that are for our community, for Northern Ireland on the world stage, all of those things, no question. But we, as a committee, need to ensure proper process was followed. And we are not in a position where we should assume anything given what has happened in our HA. So what I'm saying is, if there is no issue, and I would presume that the process was followed, but I also now have questions as to why a simple request by the CNAG has not been satisfied. That's my point. And we need to be very careful as a committee to ensure at all times, particularly with the level of these ministerial directions, that these processes are being followed. So that's all I'm saying. This is not about FIFA. It is not about the significant event that is or anything else. This is about a gap in a process which we are supposed to be scrutinising. So just to be clear, you take out the topic at hand, this is about due process. So the CNAG has raised a legitimate concern with this committee. I've picked up on it, I've looked into it, and I am saying that those minutes should be forthcoming to an extent where they satisfy the CNAG that the ministerial direction process has been satisfied. That's our role.
And we have agreed.
And we have agreed it. So just to clarify,
Chair,
we're jumping over hedges for the World Cup.
Exactly.
We're happy about it. There's no question. This is a good process.
Listen, Chair, I've sat in the committee for a number of years. I know the rules inside it. The point, I agree with your suggestion, to be fair. Nobody's actually arguing that. My point is this is a new one to us. We have to have a conversation after this to see, do we need to look at how going forward, if this is going to be like the last direction, the last day, if it's going to keep coming regularly to us, we as a committee can do our work properly, which is part of the scrutiny. That's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing for or against the... Yes. Because that's factually correct. Yes, but... And to be fair, Doreen has brought it today, and I think there's learning for us all, and I think we may at some point as a committee have to look again, because if each time that the minutes are not going to be provided and we're going to be delayed, it's still in our part of work as a scrutiny committee as well, and we need to ensure going forward we get an opportunity at addressing that as opposed to leaving it.
There's no dispute, but we have to remember at all times this is public money. We are responsible for ensuring that it is spent correctly and appropriately, and in terms of process being followed. And we're seeing more and more of these, and if the processes aren't being followed, that raises serious safeguarding questions for public funds. And that's where we're at. That's the test. It's very simple. Diane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think this just feeds well onto the next session that we'll have with the TOA in terms of the procedural points and anything that can be done to strengthen the requirement to respond to the CNAG, respond to committee requests in line with ministerial directions. So I think that it'll be a good one to pick up there.
Yeah, it will, absolutely. Okay, members, I think we're widely in agreement. We all appreciate lessons have to be learned from the past, particularly RHI, which jumps out very clearly in these discussions. And I just want to ensure, and must ensure, as chair of this committee, that we follow those processes, particularly when the CNAG has raised a concern in that regard. So just to put firmly on record on behalf of this committee, we are delighted about the World Cup. We can't wait to enjoy that great occasion, which will be a huge celebration of huge benefit to this place. So with that said, we'll move to the next item. Dorinnia, thank you very much. Seamus, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
And members, at this point, we'll be welcoming Stuart, the Treasury Officer Accounts, to the witness table for the next section. Stuart, you're very welcome. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for agreeing to attend the committee today to give evidence. We've asked you to attend, obviously, in your capacity as the Treasury Officer Accounts, given your system-wide role in setting and overseeing the framework for financial accountability, including guidance to accounting officers on Memorandum of Reply and the handling of ministerial directions. Members have been increasingly concerned about the operation of this accountability cycle in practice, in particular delays to MORs inconsistencies in approach to executive sign-off, and the quality and clarity of some responses received. These issues have in turn led to repeated correspondence and the recall of accounting officers on a number of occasions, placing additional pressures on departments and on the committee's own scrutiny processes. While the committee recognises the complexity of cross-cutting issues and the wider pressures facing the executive, timely, transparent and high-quality MORs are fundamental to effective scrutiny and public accountability. We are therefore keen today to explore how current guidance is operating in practice, what barriers exist, and what more can be done at system level to strengthen consistency, governance, and most importantly, follow-up. We'll also seek an update on recent experience of ministerial directions, of which members will have a lot of burning questions. In that context, members have also considered a ministerial direction last week relating to the HSC pay award. While there is no issue with the principle of the pay award, and we understand the huge pressure within the system for public sector workers, the circumstances surrounding the direction raised broader questions for the committee about governance, affordability and the operation of the ministerial direction process, which we are going to explore further with you today. So Stuart, you are very welcome. We'll give you an opportunity to make a few brief opening comments, and then members will have a number of questions which will tease out quite a lot of the issues anyway. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me today to attend the session, and welcome the opportunity to assist the committee in the consideration of these very important matters. As Treasury Officer of Accounts, it's my responsibility to support the committee by providing assurances on the frameworks that govern the proper, transparent and accountable use of public money. I recognise the essential scrutiny role the committee plays, and I'm committed to working constructively with members to fulfil that role. At that point, Chair, I'm happy to step in, or would you like me to expand a little bit on Memorandum of Reply or Ministerial Direction?
Well, Stuart, I think the questions are raised, and I don't want to be repetitive in doing that, because some of the questions are quite specific and get to the nub of the issue. So members do have a number of questions that they'll raise. So just in terms of yourself, we're going to focus on ministerial directions first of all. Stuart, are you in a position to update the committee on the outstanding recommendation relating to comparative analysis of ministerial directions?
Yes, Chair. I suppose what I can say is there are 3 recommendations in the report, and certainly we have completed recommendation 1 and 2. On the third element, which was about engagement with the Permanent Secretaries Group, I have certainly carried out the kind of field research, if you like, to look at the processes elsewhere in terms of the other devolved authorities. We reached out to Scotland and Wales, contacted deeper in ROI, and we've had discussions with Treasury on that front as well. We struggled to get some meaningful feedback from some of those areas, but we did have some good engagement with Treasury around it, and they offered some comments and their view on how the disparity of numbers in NI and any concerns that they had. I think, Chair, we have a good relationship with my counterpart in Treasury, and they shared some thoughts with us. And certainly, I don't think it would be appropriate maybe to cover those in open session, Chair, but I'd be very happy to write to the committee maybe to expand on some of those aspects.
Would it not be appropriate, Stuart?
I think they looked at our experiences and talked about some of the other devolved authorities in the UK, and I wouldn't feel comfortable maybe just sharing some of the quotes. While I think it's important to get that message across to the members, I don't want to kind of...
Well, you're not citing anyone in particular, and you don't have to cite any particular jurisdiction. This is a huge public interest matter. Decisions have been raised and made where public money has been spent, largely, unfortunately, with the current trend that we're seeing, money that we don't have. is being spent. Budgets are being overspent in a wide variety of departments, and I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of that over the next number of weeks and months. So I think it is in the interest that we understand how these decisions are being made.
Well, certainly, Chair, when I talked through and there was a period 5 years ago where we had an increased number of ministerial directions. We talked through a number of those cases and the disparity, if you like, in terms of benchmarking with other areas. The feedback I got from Treasury were that they were content with the processes in NI, and that any misalignment would reflect their views of other authorities and some of the decision-making processes in those areas. They felt that ours, we had a good, strong, robust level of governance. The fact that each direction comes to this committee for notification and is considered by the CNHE along the way. Again, they felt that those controls were good.
But Stuart, now, sorry for interrupting you, but I appreciate what you've just said there, but not robust in the sense of good governance if the CNAG has requested minutes in good faith, have not received them months after requesting them for a decision. Robustness, it's a loose term at the minute, to be honest, from what I'm seeing, particularly even after last week's ministerial direction.
Absolutely, Chair, and I suppose the lens that I'm referring to in that instance would be in comparison for our increased number of directions in that period 5 years ago compared to some other devolved authorities.
But equally, Stuart, if you look at other jurisdictions, it would be unheard of for a number of multiple departments to be overspending in the way we're beginning to see here.
Absolutely agree with you, Chair, on that. Absolutely.
Ministerial direction has been issued which authorises money to be spent that we don't have. I don't think would be satisfactory to other jurisdictions, and certainly I don't believe is happening on the same scale. Would that be accurate?
I would agree. I think the use of potentially a ministerial direction to provide cover for additional expenditure over and above the control totals is a very different question compared to the research that we were doing off the back of the 22 Audit Office report. And that's something that I would agree completely with the comments from this committee last week, Chair, on.
By design, Stuart, is it not the case that ministerial directions are supposed to be used in exceptional circumstances and not as a routine mechanism to resolve a problem? Why is it that I get the sense that they've been used as a routine solution as opposed to an exceptional mechanism?
I would agree with you, Chair, that it is an exceptional item. When I first came to work in public spending, it was the phrase that was used for me to explain a ministerial direction was that it is the nuclear option. And that's a very clear message in terms of it should be unusual, it should be a last resort for an accounting officer when they have concerns around a particular instruction or request from a minister. And a ministerial direction doesn't permit an accounting officer to proceed with any unlawful action or override any statutory or legal constraints that exist. It doesn't provide them with a continuing mandate for anything. They must continue to seek to address their concerns, and they should revisit the ministerial direction if the underlying circumstances change in any way.
We're seeing a situation emerge today where there's a number of these ministerial directions coming forward, which is going to result in the direct overspend of the budgets allocated to each department. The exceptional circumstances for the use of a ministerial direction should, not be there to plug structural budget gaps, defer hard decisions, circumvent proper budgetary control. There's a real danger that if this is accepted as normal practice, it could weaken accounting officer accountability, which is not good for governance, encourage unfunded commitments, which again, from a scrutiny point of view, is not acceptable because a budget is laid before the House and agreed, and then ultimately things have been paid for beyond the budget and not agreed. And it could create a very dangerous precedent across departments, which unfortunately I'm beginning to see. One department has started, another is following, and so on and so forth. And regardless of the core issue and the importance of the core issue for the reason for such decisions, this is going to cause major problems. So just with that said, I understand you're limited in your powers. You're there to provide guidance and advice. Where should we be raising, given the seriousness of the concerns around this, where should we be raising these particular issues as a Public Accounts Committee, Stuart? Because I know you haven't got the power to be dealing with it. You can only provide or issue guidance, which I've seen and is quite robust.
I think, Chair, I'll come back to what we should do in terms of next steps as a committee. I think I agree with those concerns, Chair. For me, a ministerial direction, is a response to an accounting officer raising their concerns in any of the areas that are highlighted in managing public money. And those areas, and I think it's important to go over them, Chair: regularity, propriety, value for money, and feasibility are the 4 areas. And I think, for me, Chair, and I look at everything through the lens of public expenditure. Just 20 years in working in public spending, I think, makes you do that, a bit like CNAG said about being the auditor. So I look at everything in terms of the protecting the public expenditure system and the controls that flow from that. So when a budget bill is voted through the Assembly, those are the strict amounts that accounting officers can effectively spend up to. They don't have any authority to spend beyond those controls. And a ministerial direction, for me, doesn't increase those totals in any way. It doesn't provide any additional funding. But I think you're right, and I think you used the term last week where you said these are peculiar. And I think that's where we need to try to seek and maybe provide clarity about our interpretation as a committee about how to take those ministerial directions. And I think my department, in some ways, has been very consistent to date. The minister has been really consistent on this, and if you look at, and I know I can't share a lot of his correspondence or what I have seen, but if you look at when he made the oral statement on December monitoring, he followed it up and he talked about, we're not at the end of the game yet. I think he said the final whistle hasn't gone yet, and his expectation that departments will do everything they can between now and the end of the year to manage the precarious position we're in 25/6 down to as low as possible and hopefully within those control totals. So that's one aspect, and I'm with you, and I'm with the concerns that were raised last week by the committee. For me, I don't believe a ministerial direction should allow departments or accounting officers to circumvent the public expenditure system or the control basis. And I was encouraged when the accounting officer for health effectively said that as well at this very desk. So I think in some ways we kind of need to see how things play out. I know that there's a consistent message coming from the department, both at ministerial level. Our accounting officer, Mr. Gibson, who's here next week, has written several times in recent years to his accounting officer colleagues, reminding them of their responsibilities for the stewardship of public money and the importance that they have to adhere to managing public money and other pieces of guidance, and the Government Resource and Accounts Act, NI, as well in that regard. So,
is that falling on deaf ears, Stuart?
I think,
given what we're seeing, given last week's ministerial direction,
I share your concerns, Chair, that there has been a bit of drift, shall we say, in recent years. And this actually goes back, the Audit Office report in 22, there were ministerial directions in place for potential pressures emerging, and affordability was quoted in some instances in that year. Now, as it was overtaken by events. Once the budget kicked in, those directions were no longer needed. So this is something that has been drifting for a few years, Chair, and I think you're absolutely right. The potential overspends for 2025-26 are significant. And in my 20 years in public spending, this is the most precarious position we've been in.
Yeah,
in terms of the
and I appreciate
so
you saying that, and I also appreciate, and I'll say it again for the record, Stuart, I appreciate that your powers is limited. So, and I appreciate you commenting on that in a very honest way. So we move on just directly in relation to you. What further steps can you, as the TOA, take to ensure departments comply with the guidance so that ministerial directions are brought forward for scrutiny in a timely manner?
Well, Chair, we did issue guidance on ministerial direction process. I think it was 2 years ago. We updated that. I suppose the most recent development was around the transparency aspect and the publication of the direction, which I think is really important, and that brings us into line with other authorities on that front. I think it's important the work that we do with accounting officers. Myself and the CNAG are part of the team that deliver training on 3 occasions during the year for all newly appointed accounting officers, and we will have some new accounting officers joining the next board as the permanent secretary roles are filled in the coming weeks and months. It's important that we get that clarity of message. When I'm delivering that training, Chair, I talk about the importance of living within their budgetary control totals. And I always use the term non-negotiable. And in some ways, what we're seeing around these ministerial directions undermines that position a little bit. And that frustrates me, Chair, as TOA.
And I appreciate that as well. Stuart, you provide the guidance, but necessarily you're very restricted in how that can be enforced. Would it be accurate? It's up to the departments then, with the accounting officers who are responsible with their minister ultimately.
It is, Chair, and that's why I think a clear message from this committee helps me in that role, and the audit office in their role, when we are able to point people that if we see issues that we're not happy with, that aren't acceptable, that we will be inviting accounting officers to this committee to answer for such issues.
Well, I've stated already, just for the record, the reasons as to why I do believe that this process isn't being used in excessive circumstances more routine. They're being used more routinely, and the consequences of that for this place, weakens accountability, officer accountability. I've said that, encourages unfunded commitments. It also sets a very difficult and dangerous precedent for departments. So I don't think that's ideal. But anyway, in focusing it on yourself, you've given a number of clear answers. I've just a couple of follow-ups before Colin comes in.
Can I add one more, Chair, just before you move on slightly? I also am in the lead on the consolidated fund. So part of that is the issue of cash on a daily basis. And members will all be familiar with the estimates on a budget bill where we vote a resource total and a cash total. Yeah. Those cash totals are critically important to us, and they form an essential control that we monitor on a daily basis. We're looking at the projections around cash flow. Ultimately, that's a control, Chair, that we could, at a point in time, we wouldn't be able to issue cash beyond some of those control totals. What we see is quite a disparity between the cash total and the resource total. Ultimately, we'll not know how departments have performed against that resource total until the likes of turn exercises that play out later in the spring.
I understand that.
I just want to mention it just as
we have a number of questions we'll be addressing directly to Neil next week. I've no doubt they'll be listening in to some of these to this particular session. So just by way of clarification, Stuart, so as the TOA you attend executive meetings?
I don't.
Sorry, you don't. You engage with the First and Deputy First Minister, I should say. Was that right? The accounting officer, the TEO.
As Treasury Officer of Accounts, I am part of the Department of Finance. My line management flows through that department, but my understanding is, Chair, that yes, I could write directly to First and Deputy First Minister if I had concerns on an issue that maybe affected the accounting officers or something that needed to go directly to the.
Stuart, if you felt that the ministerial directions were being used excessively, which some could argue they are, have you raised any such concerns as to TOA about the excessive use of them?
Not at this stage, Chair. I'm regularly taking soundings from the budget director, or sorry, the public spending director, from Mr. Gibson as accounting officer in DOF. We were at a meeting last week for the finance directors of all departments, and the public spending director was very clear about the importance, and this falls to all departments, Chair, to flag up any potential underspends, and they don't need to wait on an exercise. The consolidated budgeting guidance is very clear on this. As soon as they're aware of any excess funding that isn't going to take place this year, it should be offered to the centre, or at least flagged to the Department of Finance.
Well,
so every department is in this in terms of trying to manage the 2025-26 position.
So have you raised, Stuart, what I'm asking you is TOA, have you raised the repeated ministerial direction use across departments in recent times?
I haven't formally raised it, no.
Okay. And also, Stuart, in your role as TOA, which is an important role, you know, there's a danger of the use of these becoming systemic. There'd be concern. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with the concerns that have been raised in the last 2 weeks, Chair. I think it will be very interesting to see how this plays out in the coming weeks and months, and we are keeping a very close watching brief on it.
So again, just on your role, Stuart, as the TOA, if you have such concerns and share the concerns that I have raised now, why have those concerns not been brought to the attention, for instance, of the First and Deputy First Minister? Or have they? In relation to the executive use of some of these?
I'm not privy to if they have been raised separately, Chair.
You haven't raised them?
I haven't raised them formally, no. I'm working with the senior officials within my own department and the finance directors in all departments to remind them of the importance of meeting their requirements under managing public money and other various pieces of guidance.
Okay. You can understand why I've had a number of those governance questions. You know, there are concerns here. I see a trend, and I appreciate you being open with me in relation to that, Stuart. We appreciate your role as well and how restricted it is in terms of enforcing things, which you don't have power to do. I'm going to let Colin in and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose I was just struck by what you'd said there, Stuart, around, you know, in 22, Treasury were generally content with and described strong, robust levels of governance. And I suppose the danger of comparing the general to the specific and extrapolating, given the specific one we're in the minute, with an overall trend. So I'm interested in the overall trend. And I suppose I'm wondering are these type of directions almost in some ways the canary in the mine, if I may mix my metaphors, the canary in the mine for the elephant in the room? Is there a correlation between an upswing in these type of directions and periods of austerity, and does it indicate a lack of adequate public finances or fiscal powers, and can you track that? Do they fluctuate at times where budgets are just not adequate?
We had that discussion with Treasury, Mr. Dorinnia, and I always remember that the one time the Treasury had noticed a significant move in terms of their frequency of ministerial directions was when the coalition government moved in I think it was 2010, and they noticed that their ministerial direction request numbers fell significantly at that period in time. We don't know why, but it was just an observation at that point. The correlation with funding and availability I think is an interesting one, and I think there's certainly the pressure for the Departments of Health and Education to put plans together. Balancing their budget is clearly a factor in that. And I think it is. It's worth just going back to the actual wording in terms of the ministerial direction. Under regularity, the phrase that's used in managing public money is anything that's outside legal powers, assembly authority, or incompatible with agreed budgets. And I like that phrase more so than the use of the term affordability, because I think it's a constant challenge for all accounting officers to balance their budgets and live within their control totals. And that for me is the essence of good decision making and good planning, to look at their priorities and look at what options they have to bring us in online on track. But that's so certainly in the two cases this year that we've seen flagged up, I think we have to accept there was pressure there, and the pay parity issue in both cases is clearly a factor.
Yeah, my question's in the frame of the overall budget, the overall settlement. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Cahill, you're looking in briefly.
Just on that, Chair, because it's an interesting point.
Yeah, it is.
You see, Stuart, you have to ask if it's all right saying these things should be dealt with and prioritised within the budget framework, but in this case here, the last two cases, you have to say, is it for the greater good, i.e. the pay, right? And maybe this other case, I don't know. I'm only throwing that, and the reason I said to yourself, that's a broader conversation we need to have. I keep bringing back to this committee our role and responsibility to scrutinise properly, and we may need to look at the rules again, I don't know. But there has to be conversations around that. I'm not defending that position, but we understand why that is. And is that a case why some of these now directions are coming at us quick and fast? That's all I'm saying to you. So it's a broader conversation, that's all.
Absolutely agree with that. I appreciate that.
You're 100% right, Cahill, but the core point here is if all departments, because this is an issue against all departments, particularly that area, if all departments take that attitude, where does that leave us next year? Because this is going to be a continuous problem. And there's a fundamental point here for the wider public finances of this place. It's of concern. I get
agree. And my follow on that, Gwen, for us as a committee chair, how then do we address that as a scrutiny committee? That's my point. I'm not. Yeah.
We'll raise these with Neil Gibson next week, but it's you can see where the concern is coming from.
Absolutely.
Okay, Diane, Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, Stuart, for being in with us. I very much value your role both across this committee and my role in Finance Committee. And as you know, I am an accountant and worked in the field for 15 years and right across public sector, private sector industry and development community sector. It's always been my experience that whenever finance roles are left in a position that you're chasing behind people or mopping up after things, it never works well. It's really important that the role of finance is given its status and its importance. And I believe that your role needs to be backed up and given a little bit more authority, because you're doing the best that you can do there. But it just kind of feels like there's a lack of power behind what it is that you're trying to do, because you're putting out the guidance, you're doing the right things, but we're continuing to see a number of these issues. But last week specifically, we had the sort of unusual circumstances where we had the ministerial direction under review for the pay award for health and social care. So everyone, is so supportive of the health workers getting their pay award. But in terms of this one with the ministerial direction, we had the really unusual circumstance where the accounting officer was actually recommending to the minister that he seek a ministerial direction. And for me, this is a really alarming precedent to be set, because ultimately the role and responsibility, in my understanding, of the accounting officer is to say, no, minister, we cannot afford this. And then by procedure, if the minister's going ahead to do it, he makes the ministerial direction. And there's a very clear difference in governance in the rules of the two of those positions there. And I just wanted to ask you for a comment on this precedent from your position where you're sitting, and are there any other examples that you have of a ministerial direction being sought in this manner where the accounting officer is actually recommending that the minister go ahead and do something like this?
Thanks very much, Ms. Forsyth, for that question. I suppose the issue and the peculiar nature of it last week, with ministerial directions, and this came up actually in our research work with Treasury, and we discussed this, and they agreed. The ministerial direction process doesn't necessarily mean that an accounting officer disagrees with a decision. It's more that it doesn't fit within the rules or the guidance, which is a slightly different angle, and he or she may be seeking a direction to cover the gap and the inability. And I think the example we had today around the Women's World Cup is a good example of that, whereby we simply weren't able to meet the bar in terms of value for money on that particular question. So I don't think it's necessarily an issue that the accounting officer is in complete disagreement with it. But again, and I'm going back on my, I think on my first day in DOF, it was explained to me in terms of ministerial directions, if a minister wants to move the building 3 feet to the right, an accounting officer seeks a direction for that, and the minister can direct, and he's then she's taking the burden of responsibility for that decision, so to speak. Now, that's a fairly ridiculous example, but it's highlighting that point that an accounting officer would certainly disagree with that decision in terms of the use of public money. But in many of these issues, they may agree with the overall policy decision, but they are trying to make sure that they're meeting their requirements as set out in our guidance. And I think that's my take on it. I hope that helps a little.
Thanks very much. Sure, look, it is a wee bit of an unusual one. It's just us coming at this from Public Accounts Committee, and Cahill had said it last week. We hadn't really saw one like that come to us as committee before, and we have saw a little bit, of guidance ourselves on it. But in terms of the provisions of managing public money and the guidance that's issued to departments, whilst permanent secretaries, and we know, Mike Farrar was in last week from the Department of Health, and he absolutely, supports, the fair pay for the health workers. And he, as you say, supports the policy decision. But in terms of just actually going back to the procedural point, as accounting officer under the guidance of managing public money, should the accounting officer go so far as to say, I can't apply this to my budget, it's unaffordable, stop, and then hand that over, and then the minister come in and decide to do a ministerial direction? Or what exactly does the guidance say under managing public money? I'm just trying to think of the difference, the different tiers of financial governance that we have here, just for full transparency, accountability, and where the gaps should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Managing public money does state under regularity if it is incompatible with agreed budgets. And if an accounting officer has a concern with that, they should raise that concern with the minister. Now, if the minister is minded to issue a direction, that's okay, but that's not the end of the story. And the accounting officer, I believe, is under pressure to take steps to mitigate that level of overspend, and the department should prepare options and place those before the minister for their decision again. And I suppose we're mindful of the fact that accounting officers and departments feel that they're under pressure, breaching a statutory requirement, and that remains a decision for a minister as opposed to an accounting officer. But again, the minister, subject to executive agreement, has the ability to legislate to change a statutory requirement, and that's a situation that accounting officers should prepare as an option, and then again, it's for the minister to decide on that front. I know there are practicalities around that, but we can't ignore that. Those are the kind of decisions, and that's the extension beyond a ministerial direction for accounting officers and for their respective ministers to consider. And that's been advised to departments on a regular basis in recent years, and Mr. Gibson has written to accounting officers in that line, so they are all fully aware of our expectations in DOF about what steps are taken on that front.
Absolutely, and thanks very much again. And obviously we're operating in a really constrained financial situation, and the executive have come together across all parties and agreed to prioritise public sector pay. And in order to deliver that has led to these slightly unusual circumstances. But in terms of this committee, it's making sure that the procedures are being followed, which is so important for us. And you said that Neil Gibson, Permanent Secretary of Department of Finance, has written to accounting officers. I'm just trying to understand again, your role within that. Do you write to them as well, or do you sort of fall within that? It's kind of coming from you and Neil, or what's the process around that?
I think I have some formal letters that I issue on a regular basis. Anything around the guidance, managing public money, our dear accounting officer letters would go directly to the permanent secretaries. I would also issue guidance to finance directors, so the dear FD letters that go out as well, which are more of a technical accounting nature. Mm-hmm. But I suppose, and I also referenced in terms of how we met the second recommendation from the Audit Office report, periodically I would write to accounting officers with a range of governance and accountability issues, reminding them of the guidance and any emerging issues that we would see. So that would happen. But in this instances, when obviously we've been taking soundings and very much Neil taking leadership in that role, on several occasions he has written directly to the accounting officer group to remind them of the importance of living within their control totals.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Diane. Just a very brief comment on Diane's questions. I'm just struggling to understand how the accounting officer could sign off on that ministerial direction or agree to it for the pay awards, which really should have been planned for. Like, we've been hearing about these pay awards issues since the Assembly was down. It's long returned. They should have been planned for. So how can the accounting officer justify the failure of a minister to prioritise, for instance, this being a political response, a priority? He has to keep within the budget. It should have been planned for within the budget. So I don't understand how specifically I'm asking you, how can the accounting officer justify that action?
Again, Chair, we discussed this at length when we were training accounting officers, and for me, my take on it is that the level of commitment that exists in departmental budgets is a real challenge for accounting officers. Accounting officers can technically only spend what has been voted in the Assembly. So, and even a multi-year budget is subject to change in later years. It's only when we take the estimate document through and the members vote for the budget bill that they have that power to spend that money. So, accounting officers are employing huge numbers of civil servants on recurring contracts, even though they have no guarantee that they'll have that funding in future years.
24,500, not including agency staff, to be exact.
That's and all the other bills that are paid, the capital project commitments that are signed, multi-year commitments in advance. So there's always an element of assuming future budgets will flow to a certain extent, but the level of overcommitment is the key decision, I think, for accounting officers to manage that down, and future pay rises are clearly a major factor at the minute.
It is a factor. It's a factor for politicians. It's a factor for departments, but they should be planned for. That's my point. And my concern here, Stuart, and I'm sure it's yours as well, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, as the Treasury Officer of Accounts, the action taken by the accounting officer on that pay award sets a very difficult precedent, because other departments are likely to follow. Because public workers and other departments are going to say, well, they're getting paid, where's the fairness here? If they can go over budget, where's the fairness here? Do you not agree that sets a very dangerous and difficult precedent in terms of the finances of this place?
Absolutely do, Chair. I agree with that comment.
We're in. Okay. Well, any other questions on ministerial directions, members? He's content?
Just on final point on that, because Stuart, and I agree with the chair saying, and it's all right talking about planning, but surely as part of the conversation is about prioritisation now, because if you don't prioritise, I mean, sorry saying we'll plan for a pay rise and we'll plan for this. So I mean, you know, there needs to be a broader, deeper discussion. It's not for this committee, to be fair, because we have a certain scrutiny role, but if we're serious about it going forward, because, you know, we are going to have ministerial directions, I don't think it'll change, maybe not to the same extent, but we've got to learn from it. And the reason why some of these decisions, that, you know, and it's where we are, and it's the make-up and composition of what we got over here, to be honest. But my point is, it's all right. The chair keeps saying we need a plan. If we don't have sufficient funds, then you need to prioritise. So who comes first and what loses out? That's the truth of the matter. And as yourself, I know we've all certain roles and responsibilities. We need to have a broader discussion if we're going to do proper scrutiny and proper roles going forward in the future. I just want to say, and you know that as well as I do. So I hope it's part of the conversations that you're having amongst accounting officers, you know.
Just as we'll move on to MORs now, but just as a point, you know, my reading of it, I've been about for a fair long time, not as long as you, Cahill, but I will say this: things that aren't planned for and are dealt with last minute are not a priority. That's the issue. You know, this is all responsive stuff. These are not new problems, and the department's solution or the minister's solution to these problems is simply to overspend. It's not, regardless of the issue, we're here to look at the process. So I want to make that very, very clear. So we'll go to MORs. We have a number of questions from members. I'll begin, then John Burrows will follow. So just in your role, Stuart, and you've been very patient as the TOA and as the author of guidance to accounting officers, could or should you be doing more to ensure compliance with the MOR guidance and timelines?
This is something we have looked at. Again, Mr. Gibson fired a starting pistol on this when he wrote to you, and he asked me to have a look at the complexities flowing from finalising MORs and cross-cutting issues. So we've crunched some numbers, Chair, to kind of get a sense of an evidence base for that decision. And we are seeing a slight disparity in terms of the dates. We've looked back over the last 6 years, so we've had 14 MORs coming forward over that period. For a non-cross-cutting MOR, we're looking at an average response time of 8.3 weeks. When we move to the cross-cutting reports, that rises to 8.8. So there is slightly higher, and that probably reflects the added complexity of having to engage with other departments and get collaborative sign-off on the particular MOR. You know, when we look at the 14, we had 7 of those that were under the 8-week period, so about 50% compliance with the guidance. A further 3 were within another week, and then we had 3 within just under the 3-month figure. The one outstanding, which was within 8 months, was the first major capital projects, which of course the current situation is around our latest major capital project, MOR, and I know you'll be expanding on that next week with a panel of witnesses. On that basis, Chair, I suppose I'm looking at the guidance, and our guidance flows from the wider Assembly guidance on response to Assembly committees. That's where the 8-week target comes from. It's consistent with the devolved authorities elsewhere. The Scots ask for 2 months turnaround and so on. My view at this stage, Chair, is that I don't think there's a compelling evidence base to increase those levels. I know Mr. Gibson asked me to think about that, and the next stage for me, Chair, is to have that discussion with the PermSec group to see. I'm minded. I feel if we give them an extra month or longer, they would probably take it, and I don't think that would be a good move at this stage in terms of good governance and accountability. I think timely MORs are an important element.
What has the Permanent Secretary for Finance asked?
He asked me to look at whether we needed to consider any flexibility within the guidance for cross-cutting reports, which I interpreted as really should we give them additional time for the practicalities around it. I don't believe, looking at the last 6 years, there's a strong enough case for that. I think the major capital case is an outlier, and there are difficulties around that. So for me, my recommendation would be, and if the committee are happy with that, would be to hold the 8 weeks in the guidance, and we look at a sharper response time, and that's something that we have been working on, Chair, to try to improve. And I think since late 24, the timescales have been fairly good, so we can see an improvement.
Yeah,
just by squeezing out a little bit more out of our internal processes.
We're on an agreement of keeping the time frame as it is. There's 25,000 public sector workers, not including agency workers, sufficient resources to be responding to this committee for the size of Northern Ireland. So to any accounting officer that's listening, I don't believe, as chair of this committee, it's appropriate to even request or to suggest any extension of those timeframes. I think it is entirely appropriate as is at 8 weeks, and they need to ask questions of their own processes if they can't satisfy that, to be honest. But Stuart, I'm glad you agree with me on that, and I know other members have concerns about MORs. We're going to raise them now, but as is, and provided they meet them, is best. Okay, John?
Yes, just before I ask a question, I'm minded of Parkinson's law, if I think I'm right, that work expands to fill the time that's allotted to it, and if you give more time, inevitably people just take that time. So it's not the answer. Question 2, then yes. Now, really want to get specifics here. What are the specific barriers to meeting the 8-week time frame for cross-cutting MORs? Just give me what do you think the 3 main barriers are that we're not hitting these?
Thanks, Mr. Burrows. For me, it is around drafting and getting an MOR that is acceptable. What we are finding, for me, and to be effective, I think the MOR should be concise and to the point. We've been clear in our guidance to departments. We like to see that clear designation underneath each recommendation. It's accepted, not accepted, or partially accepted. We want to see target dates included in there. But what we're finding is that quite often, if a department is struggling to provide a clear response in those terms, that they will provide a lengthy explanation, and for us, sometimes that's difficult. Obviously, the content falls to the individual departments, and I accept that. But when it's been cleared by that departmental accounting officer and the minister, it then comes to the Department of Finance. So I have to clear it through my own minister before it's laid. So if there's issues in there around public expenditure and so on that maybe it wouldn't be the most appropriate place for it, I would go back to the department and ask them for to challenge maybe the wording on it at times. So that can become an iterative process and can lead to delays. And it's difficult for us. We want to see a good, clear MOR that passes muster early on, that can go to the minister, and the finance minister can have time to reflect on it and then give us the clearance to lay that MOR. So each MOR has its own individual difficulties depending on the subject matter, but effectively it's around, I think, the quality of response, and we do our best to improve it where we can and give them constructive feedback that will enable that to take place.
So there's some training there that can be done in upskilling?
I think so. I think that would be fair enough. And again, maybe the policy teams that are working on a particular area, they're maybe only working on an MOR once every 5-6 years. So it's difficult. I think we need the governance people in the respective departments to really kind of add value and look across the board. We also share Treasury minutes when they come out with departments. And quite often there'll be maybe an overlap with a topic area, and again there's some good material there to look at the kind of responses that should flow in that regard, and certainly would help in terms of training. But again, it probably comes down to capacity and competing priorities and that as well in terms of the quality assurance aspect.
Okay, just, I mean, would one of them be culture? I mean, is this just acceptable?
I hope not, but we can't rule that out. I think, the audit recommendations fold into a department's administrative processes. We expect the Departmental Audit and Risk Committee and the internal audit teams within departments to look at outstanding recommendations and the progress that's being made on that. So when they're drafting the response to the MOR, that should be in the back of their mind. They should be thinking about how we're going to meet this requirement or request in future years or on a timely basis. So, I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, John. Okay, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Stuart, for all your detailed information. What more do you feel can be done to encourage departments, to provide partial or interim information where some recommendations are dependent on longer-term strategies? Do you feel?
I suppose, Mr. Dunn, I would point to the follow-up regime that exists. Normally, when an MOR comes as a committee, traditionally we would then pass that off to the departmental committee. And the procedures that exist within that department in terms of DARC and the board members that will follow up on it. I think reinforcing that message is important, but also I think some of the work that this committee has done recently to invite witnesses to come and discuss the MOR, and I noticed Mr. Farrar was keen to come back again. I think he offered at the end of last week's session. So I think there in certain circumstances that it's appropriate to utilise that, and we'll be including that in our accounting officer training moving forward to remind them of the likely future requirement to attend this committee and discuss progress on MOR.
That's an important aspect of it, and the departments can't just put it in the long finger as such, and put it back down to blame a longer term strategy waiting on that. So I think there's an important job of work to do, certainly for ourselves and yourselves as well going forward.
I think the more regular request for updates is an interesting one. Traditionally, it would have been annual updates, but I think the fact that we're asking for things on a 6-month basis and in some instances a quarterly basis, I think that provides an enhanced focus, which is good.
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stuart, for being with us today. As a committee, we have observed an increasing tendency for MORs to be submitted to the Executive for sign-off, contributing to further delays. So who decides whether an MOR requires Executive sign-off, and on what basis?
I suppose, Chair, we've taken it on a case, or through the Chair, sorry, Mr. Buchanan, we've taken it on a case-by-case basis. And certainly with the cross-cutting ones where the recommendations led themselves to requiring that kind of corporate sign-off, if you like. I remember having the discussions with, I think Sue Gray was the Permanent Secretary in Finance at the time. The report, or the MOR in particular, was around the Social Investment Fund. And we made a decision to seek corporate sign-off around the executive table to get the buy-in that we felt we needed to deliver on that front. And that slowed up that process, maybe by 10 days, 2 weeks, but I think strategically it was the right thing to do given the subject matter. So I suppose there's a role for us. We generally coordinate any cross-cutting reports in the TOA team, and we'll work with our accounting officer to take the views, and it can be raised at next board in the first instance, and then we can go to the executive when we need to. But it's considered on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And would clearer guidance then reduce unnecessary delay while respecting the executive's process?
I suppose major capital is the one that lets us down on this front, and actually the MOR itself is not necessarily the issue. We've had early drafts of the MOR, but the investment strategy is such a central foundational plank to it that we when we were consulted on it in the early stages of the process, I was supportive of the fact of holding off in the hope that we would get the investment strategy signed and agreed, you know, and I think that would add a lot of value to the MOR and the information from it. But unfortunately, to this point, it hasn't been successful. So it in that instance, yes, I think, you know, it would have helped apply pressure at least. I don't think it would have guaranteed the agreement on the investment strategy, but it certainly would have helped with pressure.
How do you explain then the apparent inconsistencies in approach between different MORs?
Well, yeah, I think again that's down to the nature of our structure, Mr. Buchanan, and the fact that we have different approaches maybe from departments and the specialist teams within those departments that are leading on the MORs. You know, when you look at the MORs that have come forward in recent months, there are some similar aspects to it, but you know, some departments embrace the opportunities and seem to link in well with the recommendations as they're worded. You know, others have more of a challenge, maybe trying to balance some ongoing work in a similar area, and it's almost kind of trying to make that fit with the recommendations that have come out of the inquiry's hearings. So I think different departments, different teams, we're always going to see an element of a slightly different approach. But for us, the core messages remain the same about clarity, you know, and clarity on dates and deliverables and key outputs, and that's the message we certainly try to get across. But I accept that there's stylistic changes department by department.
I think that is key to it, but we're not seeing that because, you know, you have some coming through with vague or revised timescales, and you have others with unclear explanations and recommendations not been accepted and issues like that. So I think, you know, it is clear. The key to all of us is that it's clear information that we're receiving whenever these things do come forward.
I accept your point, and it is difficult, and I've been doing some work over the last couple of weeks on access to GPs. Will be one of the MORs that's coming forward here and hopefully next week, and it's very difficult to kind of and you know, I don't want to kind of jump the gun here on this when it's coming out so shortly, but a lot of the information that they're wanting to talk about in terms of the departmental reset on health and the impact that that's having on access to GPs is included in there, and I find myself struggling to think, should we encourage the department to edit that out? But then I look at it and think, no, there's a lot of meaningful information in there, and I have to accept they're the experts on this, and in the interest of transparency, it's important to leave it in. But some of the early recommendations in the access to GP reports, they certainly aren't concise in the response, and you'll see that in the next week or so when that comes forward. But it's difficult, Mr. Buchanan. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tom.
On board those
Okay,
comments.
Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. I'll squeeze a question in there again. Stuart, thanks very much. I mean, been an interesting conversation, and I just want to preface something before I ask the question. See, in terms of, because I've noticed myself, and I want to pay a tribute to the Chair and the committee, we've gone about it a slightly different way ourselves on how we go about the process and trying to, and we've learned from, you know, even in my time, we've learned different ways to go about it, and we're presenting more information, better information, and we'll look at some of the inquiries we've done and some of the responses. So, working with the audit office, and I think maybe in some ways that's a bigger challenge then for departments to respond. But just in general, your overall assessment of the standard of MORs as it sits today, what's your assessment of that?
I think we've raised the profile of it through this session, and I think that's a good thing. I think at times the recommendations can be a challenge to departments, and while that makes maybe it difficult to to address a meaningful response within a fairly small timetable, of 8 weeks. That's probably a good thing as well, to challenge departments and be disruptive in that area. Ultimately, I think we all want to see improved public services, and I can appreciate sometimes the recommendations are disruptive and challenging in terms of maybe timing, in terms of funding. But I think overall, from a public audit perspective, I think that's good governance, and I welcome that direction of travel. And I think the departments are putting in the work. They are providing us with responses, and I think there'll be learned experiences there as we move ahead. But I'm encouraged for the future. I think we're in a better place at this stage than we were at the start of the session, and I think that's encouragement, and we can build on that.
Oh, and just a fine point, because like I said, it's our role to scrutinise, but likewise we try and offer some solutions as part of our investigation inquiries, and that's the right way to go about it. But at the end of the day, it's about accountability, and like I say, it's good if you feel in the conversations you're having we're making progress, well then we're doing something right. But there's other things we can learn ourselves, but just thank you very much for your answers. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Colin.
Yes, thank you. It was interesting and a useful session in that regard. Yep. Does your team get any opportunity, Stuart, to kind of provide advice or provide challenge before they are submitted? Do they ever?
We do, Chair. And it's something. Sorry to cut across here. I hope I was okay.
No, fine.
It's something that we have really tried to be more proactive on. We've tightened our timescales. We're asking departments for a first draft, in that 3 to 5 week window, so that we've got the opportunity to give them feedback and improvement, and they then have time to respond to those. So that's really important for us, and we need to make the standard for our finance minister that he's comfortable with it for laying. So quite often we'll go back with drafting notes, challenges, maybe requests for further clarity and information to try to get it to the stage. But we're mindful of what I think are clear parameters that have come out from this committee about their expectations for MORs. So it's helping us.
And I think probably part of the answer is in the way you framed the answer to that question, but are departments generally welcoming and proactively engaging in that and positively engaging in that iteration and reiteration?
I think in the 8 week window they're probably not as grateful, simply because of the pressures and capacity issues, and that's the same for us on our side as well. But when we get back in the helicopter and take a look at it, I think it's the right thing to do, and I suspect departments would be in the same place. MORs are about improvement in public services, and we all need to embrace that. I think in the right spirit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. David Honeyford. David's joined us online.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that came up, and Stuart, thank you for your presentation, but one of the things that came up this year at the PC conference was the kind of revisit and progress. And has there been any sort of systematic approach been considered for recommendations here in Northern?
It would allow them to maximise their impact.
Thanks, Mr. Honeyford.
Was another question there?
Not sure where that came from.
Was that your question? Supplementary already, David?
Yeah, wasn't me.
Yeah, I know there's been some work in our own department on this in terms of streamlining the recommendations, and for us it's around the work of the departmental audit and risk committees. Okay. And those are a really important vehicle to follow up. The audit office attend those at a departmental level, which is really important as well, and gives it that independent viewpoint. And the independent members of those committees as well, of course, have a key role to play, and those committees have to be chaired independently, which is good too. So the follow-up on recommendations is so important, and I think the fact that we maintain a database in the department, So as recommendations flow, we populate that and we seek updates on a regular basis from departments. And for those cross-cutting aspects, it's important to us to go out to the respective departments. So, for example, with the skills inquiry we conducted recently, we're chasing both departments for their part inputs to populate those accountability grids, we call them. So they're an important exercise in terms of looking at progress overall. Again, it's one that probably suffers a little bit more in terms of the systemic follow-up. I think we should be looking maybe a little bit more around the dates to completion on some of those recommendations, looking maybe at some of the numbers, some trend analysis on that front, I think would be really helpful. And if we had the capacity, that would be the area I'd be interested in moving into next in terms of that follow-up piece.
Okay. And would you be willing to support the committee to develop such an approach for us here? Yeah.
Absolutely, I think it would be really helpful, and it would complete the loop for us in terms of seeing the successful implementation. Some kind of periodic reporting or exception reporting for those recommendations that aren't getting followed up within a particular period of time. But I think the Audit Office engagement on the DARACs is already probably, I would expect them to be, being very mindful of those in that piece of work. And again, we employ the independent non-execs to sit on boards and to chair those meetings, so they have a role to play on it as well. So we don't want to completely tread on their toes, but I think we're all in it together, and I would hope that we could share information and maybe take something forward in the future if we had the capacity and the opportunity to do so.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Colin,
Yeah, just one other one, Stuart, around what more do you think that you could do yourself to encourage clearer explanations and better, more robust timelines?
Well, in some ways, the exchange with Mr. Honeyford there on MORs, I think we could look more at the training piece in terms of responses. It's something we probably don't have the capacity for at the minute. We're, like all departments, finance is struggling for resources, and we have to prioritise. In recent years, we've updated managing public money for the first time in 15 years, and that's the most important document we produce. So refreshing that once every 15 years is an example of how we're struggling for capacity and for priorities. So I think that the type of improvements we would do in terms of training, in terms of follow-up on recommendations, that's the limiting factor for us. I think there's lots we would be keen to do and work with the committee on, but at the moment I think we're struggling for the bandwidth to take on some of that work.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. Important question. Okay, Padraig, are you there? Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, fire away.
Chair, it's just around the accountability. So basically the accountability grids and the audit committee oversight of PAC regulations. Are you confident that those are being applied consistently?
I suppose, Mr. Delargy, thanks for that comment and question. I'm probably not well enough cited to offer a comprehensive response in terms of the consistency aspect of that, and I think again that goes to the structure in terms of monitoring of the progress in those areas, and the fact that it's individual DARACs, we're putting a lot of emphasis on the chair and the non-exec directors and carrying out that role for us. So I suppose the consistency point is probably challenging on that front. And that I would agree, and Mr. Gildernew's point about that would be an area we would be wanting to look at if we had the capacity to kind of check that right across and make sure standards are being met consistently. Absolutely, would agree with that.
Okay, and just one more from me, Chair. Just in terms of are you in a position now to update the committee in terms of the outstanding recommendation? That was the one relating the comparative analysis of ministerial directions.
Yes, Mr. Delargy, I think my assessment at this stage is that we have carried out fieldwork with different degrees of success. We had some extensive feedback from Treasury, which was helpful, and Cabinet Office as well were particularly helpful, and they talked through, their directions and challenging subjects like the Rwanda scheme was a ministerial direction that they shared with us the process around that. There were some other ones, the sale of the RBS shares was another ministerial direction that they had issues with. So it was helpful to get some of that feedback in terms of the process, and it's thrown up some misalignments that we have with Treasury. So, for example, when they take a ministerial direction, or when a ministerial direction is issued, they simply copy papers to the PAC, the Departmental Select Committee, the CNAG, and the TOA. So the added element that we have, I think, is the CNAG considering the ministerial direction and then presenting to this committee. So and in some ways, I think what's happened in recent months has helped, raise awareness around some of the issues and concerns on that front. So actually, if we were looking to strictly align with Treasury on that front, that's an element of our process that you could maybe argue we could do away with. But I think after what's happened in recent weeks, there's significant value in that, and if anything, I think we need to extend beyond that and see what menu of options are available to this committee from that point on when we do have concerns, So it's been really helpful to garner some of that information and look comparatively at it. I was able to sit in on the accounting officer training at Whitehall, which was a real eye-opener as well in terms of the challenges and the issues of accounting officer. It validated a lot of the stuff that the CNAG and I deliver in terms of our own accounting officer training, but it also gave us a fresh look and a fresh perspective on it, which was good. So I suppose the next stage for me is getting time to work with the Perm Sec group in some kind of presentation or workshop type situation, and then write up our findings from that piece of work, and that has suffered, Mr. Delargy, and that's on me and my team. But I think we took great assurances from the significant reduction in the numbers of ministerial directions, and obviously we went through since the Audit Office report, I think, dealt with the directions up to the autumn of 22. Since then, obviously, I think we had one in 23-4 and none in 24-5. We are seeing a slight uptick this year. Certainly, I think we're aware of 3 with another 3 in the system. So I think it's a very good time to press ahead with the completion of that work, and I'll be looking to try to bring that out. And actually, some of the issues that have emerged with those recent directions, it's a very timely opportunity, I think, to have a discussion with our accounting officer team on that front. So we'll be looking to finalise that in the weeks and months ahead.
It's really useful. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, Stuart, you've taken a lot of questions today, and we do appreciate you answering them. And I know that you will appreciate that this committee recognises the complexity of the issues that have been discussed, but it remains clear that timely, transparent and high quality MORs, along with robust governance around ministerial directions, are essential to effectively scrutinise public expenditure and ensure accountability. Members now will consider as a committee the evidence that has been provided, the answers you gave, including implications for guidance, consistency of approach and follow-up arrangements, and will determine what further action or engagement may be required. So we do appreciate you being here, Stuart, and thanks very much for taking questions and for answering them as honestly as you have. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, members. Okay, members, we'll now go into closed session for the remainder of the meeting. Okay, thank you.